This is Greyhound Nation, Episode 15, recorded March 25th, 2021, The Greyhound Project. Greyhound Nation is a podcast for Greyhound enthusiasts produced by Greyhound enthusiasts. To learn more about our show and its hosts, visit our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Greyhound Nation podcast. I'm Michael Burns, and now here's your host, John Parker.
Welcome back, everybody. Today's topic is an organization that I've always been very fond of, the Greyhound Project. And we have folks with us on this roundtable discussion that were there at the very beginning, have been with it for a number of years, and two folks that are going to take it into the future. Our participants today are Joan, Belle from Massachusetts, Sarah Norton, also from Massachusetts, and John and Susie McQuade of the Greyhound Adoption League of Texas, from Texas. So welcome all of you, and thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Joan, let's start with you. You were in on the ground floor, so to speak. Tell us a little bit about, tell us your background in Greyhounds, and then what led to your being part of the group that formed the Greyhound Project.
Well, like most people who got involved with the dogs, I started out as an adopter.
Sounds like your Greyhound wants to have a word or two about that past too.
We're having a discussion about who gets what dog did. Hey. Anyway, there were a number of us who had adopted Greyhounds in the sort of late 80s, early 90s. And back in that period of time, there was so little information available about the dogs as pets that we tended to sort of scratch our heads and try and get answers to sort of common stuff that people now take for granted. And there were a bunch of us that sort of hung out at various events that started thinking that maybe somebody ought to start filling in the blanks. We weren't particularly interested in starting an adoption group because none of us had the time or the professional background to be able to do that.
Were you each affiliated with an adoption group? Did you volunteer for different Massachusetts area?
Each of us had adopted one or more Greyhounds from Greyhound friends. And that was, through their reunions and other activities, that's how we all got to know each other pretty well. And as I say, there was sort of a small group of us that were really frustrated about not having a whole lot of information about the dogs or what was going on with Greyhound adoption, sort of on a more global scale. And that's kind of where it got started. We started with thinking about, okay, how do we start gathering information and sharing it with the rest of the adoption world and getting our arms around what that adoption world looked like. I mean, where was it happening? What was going on in other places?
Who were the originals?
Let's see here.
Let's name names.
Name names. There was Joan Martin, who was at that point, I think, treasurer of Greyhound Project. A fellow by the name of Bob Fast, who was a litigating attorney with one of the big law firms in town. Lisa Harrod, who was also a litigating attorney in one of the other law firms in town. Myself, there were two people who were social workers and a mental health counselor.
Interesting group.
It was. So anyway, when we launched the Greyhound Project, we started out with basically a newsletter that we were sending to adoption groups.
Wasn't that Speaking of Greyhounds? Was that the name?
That's what it was.
Yeah,
that's what it was.
I think I got one of the mid 1990s version. And then before we go to that, who came up with the name?
I honestly don't remember, John. It was probably one of those things in conversation
Yeah.
that sort of came out of the blue.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I forgot. Joan Dillon was also.
Yes, I was going to wonder. I wondered if Joan
Dillon.
Dillon was one of the originals.
And she was affiliated with GPA at that point and was running the GPA New Hampshire chapter. And actually, it may have been Joan that came up with that name, now that I think about it. But anyway, we started with a newsletter that was focused primarily at adoption groups, trying to get some sort of conversations going on between adoption groups so that they could help each other. And it was one of the things that happened about that time was the closing the track at Waterloo, Iowa. It was the first time that I became aware of being able to network groups and move large numbers of dogs from where they were surplus to adoption groups that could take them in.
Yeah.
Because prior to that, every time that a regional track, or a seasonal track would close, there was scrambling around to find adoption groups that were locally able to take them. There was also a large number of dogs that sadly were put down at that point. Don't forget that more than 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But like I say, the closing of the Waterloo track was the first time that there was a way of handling this problem other than pulling your hair out.
What was there when you were forming it, was there conversation about what position, if any, the project would take about racing?
We were always pretty adamant, absolutely from the beginning, that we'd be dead neutral on that.
Uh-huh. And how was it funded? How was the Greyhound Project funded? Did you each all chip in a few bucks, or how was that done?
Initially, yeah, but the largest funding came when we launched the calendar, which happened the same year. And the calendar became our first major source of funding.
Yeah.
And it sort of went on from there.
And was the original model for the calendar, this is the Celebrating Greyhounds calendar, and it was, I assume it was named that from the very beginning.
Yes, it was.
Was it the sales model for it the same as it is now? That is to say that you sell it to adoption groups at wholesale, so to speak, and they sell it at retail as a fundraiser for each one, rather than the Greyhound Projects selling the calendar, directly.
Yes. Yep. It's always been that model.
And who came up with the calendar idea?
Well, actually, the local golden retriever rescue organization, which was quite big and had a long history, had a golden retriever annual calendar for years. And I kept stumbling across it when I'd go to the vet's office. I said, aha, we can do one of those. And we did.
And did it have I remember one of the things that was, in addition to the great photos of the Greyhounds, was that it always had, the ones I had always had a Greyhound Adoption Group directory in the back. You could look and see where that was. Was that from day one, from first calendar?
Yep, that was also from day one.
Yeah.
Again, it was sort of trying to put a global view of what was going on in Greyhound adoption. And if you had a calendar and you happened to live in East wherever and wanted to adopt a Greyhound because you saw them in the calendar and they looked like a neat dog, there was some place that you could go to get information about where you could find one.
Yeah. And so the calendar was the big fundraiser from the get-go, from the very beginning.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was. It was.
And back in those days, I'm going to test your memory here. What kind of money are we talking about that the calendar raised for the project? Do you remember what the?
Yeah, probably 15,000 a year.
Yeah.
I mean, given that everybody on the project were volunteering, so there wasn't any other overhead involved.
Yeah.
That took us a long way.
Talk a little bit about the process for picking out the photos that got selected for the calendar.
Oh boy. that was, we put out the invitation to send in photographs for the calendar, and we'd get absolutely everything and no matter how clear you tried to be in terms of what was usable, you'd get everything from a Polaroid
You get slides.
To black and white photographs.
Yeah. And no digital back then, right?
No, but gradually that started to take over. And then we would sort of gather a bunch of adopters that we knew, sort of friends of the Greyhound world, and sit around going through the photographs, selecting the ones that sort of met the general consensus that they'd be good for the calendar. We tried to make sure that the same photographer didn't appear too many times in the calendar.
Yeah.
Because of course some people are much better taking photographs than others. I happen to be the ones that have sort of the telephone wire running through the dog's head in the background. But we'd spend a full day going through and selecting, down to kind of the last bunch. And then as the calendar got laid out, the final decision got made in terms of which ones would fit where.
Yeah. Yeah. Other than technical aspects to them, clarity and so forth, were there any no-nos? We don't want any pictures of greyhounds doing X.
I don't think so.
Yeah, mostly no humans were involved.
Yeah.
Occasionally other species, a nice cat and dog was always nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I can remember Cindy Hansen telling me no stacked greyhounds, none pose like the show pose, which of course was music to my ears. So what do you think what got traction for the Greyhound Project among adoption groups and the adoption community early on? Do you think it was more the newsletter, the calendar? What got the recognition that the project was looking for in terms of fulfilling that goal of being a support organization for Greyhound adoption groups?
John, I'm not actually sure that it succeeded in that regard across the entire adoption, in the entire adoption group community, because some groups were intentionally isolated within themselves. That's sort of the kindest way I can put it. They had their view of greyhounds and the greyhound universe and where they fit into it, and they weren't interested in becoming part of a larger sort of community of greyhounds and greyhound adopters.
Really? That's surprising. I mean, especially in the context of today, that of course, this was all before social media. And why did they want to be isolated? What gave rise to that desire?
A part of me wants to say that some of them felt as if we were in competition with them. Although
even though you weren't placing greyhounds yourself.
Even though we weren't placing greyhounds.
Yeah.
Some of them had very strong anti-racing positions and would tolerate, nobody challenging that.
Yeah. Neutral was not pure enough for them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially when, at least with the newsletter, we tried to get, people from the industry, people like Gary Guccione submitted a couple of articles at our request, talking about some of the things from the industry's perspective. And that's sort of the kind of discussion that goes on now and has been going on for like the past 5 years or so between, the greyhound racing industry and the greyhound adoption community simply didn't exist back then.
Yeah. Much more hostility and adversity in terms of the way that they.
Suspicion and, nobody was quite sure whose motives were leading what. I mean, it was generally a pretty, from today's perspective, not a terribly productive kind of environment.
Yeah.
Joan, when did the website content start to become as vast as it was? Well, I met you in 1999, and at that time it was huge. But I don't know when the content, where it came from.
That was mostly Dan Schmidt, who did a huge part of that. And that probably started, I don't know, late 1990s.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense.
To me, from my perspective, we started our adoption group, GPA Atlanta Southeastern Greyhound Adoption, in '98, and I remember there being a website about that time. I think it was just in its infancy,
Mhm.
and it was mostly the directory of groups, and that's where we sent if we got inquiries from outside of our territory, so to speak, we would send the people to that directory to have a look at it. And also it had some, basic information about general Greyhound adoption principles and what to expect from an adoption group and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when did the newsletter, and Sarah, this may be more in your time, but maybe not. I'm trying to remember when I first got my first magazine. When did the newsletter kind of transition or evolve into that nice, slick magazine celebrating greyhounds? Do you remember, Joan?
Well, the first issue of Celebrating Greyhound of the magazine came out in 1996.
Okay.
And the newsletter continued for another year or so beyond that.
Yeah.
Oh, so you published both at the same time?
Until 98, they were merged.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a short period of time, we published both.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, the magazine was, and I'm glad that it's gotten all put online now, but it was a great magazine. I think that's where the Greyhound Project really came into its own as a national organization, because, individuals could subscribe to it. It wasn't just sent to adoption groups.
Mhm.
Any adopter could subscribe to it at a relatively reasonable price. It was back in the great day of print publications.
Yeah.
And, it just had great articles. I always marveled at the breadth of the articles that the editors could think up. I used to talk to Cindy Hansen about that. How in the world do you come up with so many topics for the Greyhound adoption community? And she just said, your editorial board just bounced ideas around, and there you go.
Well, it also helps that there are a lot of fairly smart people who adopt greyhounds.
Yeah.
So if you reach out, that talent is out there, just waiting to be asked.
At some point, Greyhound Project developed kind of an unofficial partnership with GPA, Greyhound Pets of America. I can remember the Greyhound Project sponsoring what they used to call it at the GPA conventions, a wine and cheese evening on Friday nights. It was always a weekend conference. And when did that start up? How did the GPA folks kind of come into that sort of a partnership, unofficial, informal partnership with the Greyhound Project?
Well, that sort of happened because I invaded the GPA national meeting in West Palm Beach the first year that the Greyhound Project was around, because GPA had the only network of adoption groups, namely, the GPA network.
Yeah.
Was sort of accessible. So I invited myself down to their national meeting and invited myself to to every national meeting thereafter.
And then she started inviting me.
And the fact that Joan Dillon was also she was one of the original founders on the GPA side
Yeah.
of the, that helped as well.
Yeah.
The other adoption network was the one that Susan Netboy had assembled, but they never had any sort of national meeting or regular meetings. They were just sort of a network of a number of the other adoption groups that were out there.
What was the name of that network? I mean, I know I identify her with the Greyhound Protection League. Was that the name of the network?
No, it wasn't, and I'm blocking it right now. It will occur to me sometime during this
Okay,
conversation.
yeah, speak up when it does. That's fine. Very interesting. So, Sarah, let's kind of bring you in at this point and tell us about your background in Greyhounds, and then how did you first learn about the Greyhound Project?
Sure. Well, I had seen greyhounds somewhere and thought they were beautiful, and looked them up online. I found this website from the Greyhound Project, and I read every word on it, which took me hours and hours. There were so many. This was 1998. And at that time, there were a ton of articles. And then I called every single adoption group in Massachusetts, which of course I didn't know at the time that, the 25 GPA groups were really all the same people. I called every one of them. I annoyed them all. And I found a Greyhound and started learning about, I met some other people who had Greyhounds online. And then I heard about this event in Dewey Beach, Delaware. And I talked to my neighbor who also had a Greyhound into going on vacation with me down there. And I was absolutely blown away. It was the 1999, which I believe was the Greyhound Project's first year of organizing the event. And there were 1,000 Greyhounds and 1,000 people on the beach. It was just unbelievable. And I heard there was this woman, Joan Belle, who was sort of in charge of everything. And, to me, this was like a mythical thing. Like, how could this possibly be? And then I actually met the woman. And she was pretty little. She was pretty friendly. And
a force of nature.
Yes. And she has this way about her. If you've got a suggestion for her, she says, good idea. Why don't you do it?
Yes.
I said, why doesn't the world know about this event? And she said, I think you should do the public relations. Okay. And I said, okay. So that first year, spent a year promoting the event, contacting media, getting all kinds of attention for it. And the next year it was twice as big. And I think by the time 2000 ran around, it was right around when Joan invited me to join the project board. So we got to know each other I kept calling her and asking her more questions and figuring out how to get this thing done, how to let the world know that there was this amazing event.
Yeah. What, Joan, who came up with the idea for the Dewey Beach? With what was called Dewey Beach, and then it was called Greyhounds Reach the Beach, and we'll get into the present of it in a minute. But who had that idea, and how was Dewey Beach selected?
Well, it was a child of the internet.
Early on, no doubt.
Back in those days, I don't know whether it was a news group.
I think it was a news group.
The old Greyhound L, perhaps?
It was before the Greyhound L, actually.
Yeah, it was before the Greyhound L. But in any event, 3 people, Judy Dillon, Martha Sherman, and Pat Tyson, all of whom are in the sort of the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland area, ended up chatting about wanting to go to the beach. And it was, I think, somebody's wedding anniversary. And they were going to go, if they could find a place, they were going to go to the beach with their dogs over the Columbus Day weekend. So they started looking, I mean, the three of them started contacting communities and sort of accommodations in beach towns from the New Jersey shore all the way down to the Maryland shore.
Yeah,
And
they
it-
were looking at Atlantic City.
Yeah, they were looking at Atlantic City.
Mhm.
The only place where they could bring their dogs turned out to be this place called the Atlantic Ocean Side in Dewey Beach, Delaware. And that's how it started. It started with, and that, so then they said, hey, we're going to go to the beach over Columbus Day weekend. Anyone want to come with us? The first year there were, I think, 24 people who showed up with their dogs. And it just exploded from that.
Yeah. Did it become a fundraiser for the project, or was it kind of a net revenue or net no revenue proposition?
It was a break-even proposition.
Yeah. Yeah.
We did use it to raise money. We were supporting research into osteosarcoma through the Morris Foundation, and would do a fundraiser for that during that Dewey Beach weekend.
Yeah.
But it was for the Morris Foundation research, not for the Greyhound Project.
Yeah. Yeah. So Sarah, take us up, since you were on the first one with the PR effort, take us up through its various iterations over the years, and when I think at some point the Greyhound Project was no longer associated with the Dewey Beach event. Kind of take us through that chronology.
Sure. Well, the event literally doubled in size every year. I thought it was 64 people and dogs the first year, but at any rate, it was a bunch. And it just about doubled every year. By 2001, I think there were close to 3,000. I mean, it was crazy. It got up to over 4,000 at one point. We had some issues with weather, and that's to put it mildly. There were some real rainouts. It became an event that had multiple seminars going on at the same time at lots of venues, many of which were outdoors. There were also tons of vendors in tents outside. And Dewey Beach, Delaware is a little tiny strip of land in between the bay and the ocean. It's about 4 blocks wide. When there's a bad storm, Dewey Beach is much of Dewey Beach is underwater. And so we had a couple of years where we had real rainouts for the vendors, and that became a hardship. We had a hard time finding places indoors. We did a big brunch every Sunday morning, and it was a big fundraiser, as Joan said, for the Morris Animal Foundation. And that space eventually was turned into a hotel toward the end of our tenure doing this. We did it for, I believe, 10 years. I think it was 1999 to 2008 were the formal Greyhound Project years. Starting in 2009, we sort of loosely helped organize things, but we stopped charging money and doing t-shirts and doing all the work. It was kind of, you guys want to come and have fun, but we're going back to our roots. And we decided not to make it a year-round job, which is what it had become for us.
Yeah. Did you pass it? Did the project pass it on to another organization, or did it just kind of go back to being a loosely formed event where everybody came on that same weekend every October?
Initially, it just was a loosely formed event. Eventually, we were approached by another organization that asked us if they could take it over. And we said, we don't own anything. There's nothing copyrighted here. This is an event that is of the people. No one ever created this event. The founders were just 3 couples who got together for the weekend and invited some friends. It got really big, so they asked us to help organize. And then it got really big for us, where it really was a full-time job. 2008, I literally worked full-time for the Greyhound Project in addition to my full-time job. It was a big job. So, we let it go, but another organization did want to take it over, and they eventually have taken it over.
And who is that?
What is his group's name? The Greyhound wine tour. And well, they also do that event. I'm trying to remember what his group's called.
I've heard of Greyhounds, and I think that probably is the one I've seen associated with it.
Yeah. I don't know why I'm having I'm blanking on their name right now, but they decided to copyright the name. And that's a little controversial because there's some people who feel very strongly that it should not be that way. The Greyhound Project takes no position on that. We have always been neutral on pretty much everything. It's all about the dogs. It is not about people. It's about education. It's about having fun and community and getting together with people.
Is it still held?
It is indeed. And those of us, Joan and I and many of our cohorts still go and actually rarely go to other events there. We just get together. We walk on the beach, we hang out with our dogs, we have our favorite restaurants, we gather at the Atlantic Ocean side, and like old times.
I take it they didn't have one in 2020, or did they?
No, they didn't.
What about the one before that? What was the attendance like at the 2019, which I guess is the most recent version of it?
Honestly, I don't know their numbers anymore, but people I like to hang around with all still go. But there's probably 15 or 20 people that are my friends that I see down there. There's the Massachusetts contingent, and then there's the Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey contingent. But I think it's become a very different thing to those of us that are the old timers.
Yeah.
A lot of people are still, I don't need any more Greyhound sweatshirts. There's tons of people who do. They're new to the Greyhound world, and it's wonderful. I'm glad they have this gathering and they can meet people with things in common in this community. But I have that.
Yeah.
So
Is it going to be held in 2021?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. But the one thing that did happen was that, the Greyhounds Reach the Beach spawned a number of other similar kinds of sort of regional get-togethers all over the country.
Yeah.
So
really took off.
Yeah. You don't have to be, on the East Coast to be able to go to one of those kinds of events, which are, Greyhounds from all over.
Yeah.
And vendors from all over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the project really kicked that concept off, didn't they? When you think about it, with Dewey Beach, there weren't really any other regional gatherings that I recall at the time.
It was the first one I ever heard of.
Yeah.
No, and it was really something. I said to Joan that first year, I was practically in tears. I was so happy. Driving down the New Jersey Turnpike, at every rest stop, you'd get out and there were Greyhounds all over the lawn. And taking the ferry from Cape May, New Jersey, there's Greyhounds all over the deck. It was like Disney World for Greyhound people. It's really something.
So Sarah, bring us up to what happened in the first decade of this century with the project. The magazine continued. Dewey Beach was continuing. What was kind of the Greyhound Project's state of affairs at that point?
We were doing well, publishing the magazine. The magazine was more than 50 pages every issue. We had a paid designer. Beautiful magazine. We continued with the calendar. We, with Joan's help, introduced a weekly desk planner in addition to the wall calendar. And those sales continued to grow. We also introduced National Adopt a Greyhound Month late in the, it's probably 2009 or 2010. And
whose idea was that?
That was, I believe it was Melissa Cook. She is also a former president. She was, after Joan came Michael McCann, then Melissa Cook, and then me. So we've each done many years. in service to the project. But yeah, we hire a professional PR firm every year, and they get a ton of national attention for the dogs. So that was, one of our more recent inventions. And we continued with the growing the website, updating the website, we have a directory, an international directory of adoption organizations. It used to be published back in the early days as on paper, and then became part of the website, and now is only on the website. We also put a version in the back of the calendars. So those are the primary things. I think the website is probably our most used thing by adopters. It's just a wonderful place to learn about the dogs, and also just to find a group. We get constant inquiries on how can I adopt a dog. So that's been a major role since I joined in 2001 till now. Our primary role has been educating adopters. We do what we can to support the adoption groups, and that's primarily through the calendar.
How did it grow? How did the project grow during this time period, both financially and in terms of, the number of volunteers you had on board?
Financially, we were very healthy in the first 10 years the 2000s, like 2000 to 2010. We were doing great. The magazine, as you might imagine, with all print publications, it became a challenge to have enough advertising, enough readers, enough paid subscribers to break even. There were years we didn't break even, but that's okay because the magazine served our mission of educating adopters. But it became a little bit of a burden around, I'd say 2009, 2010. We were losing a lot of money. It cost over $30,000 to put out each quarterly issue. And that, it's difficult. Newspapers and all magazines have the same problem.
Yeah,
So
it's been sad to watch the demise of so many fine publications.
We struggled with it. And finally, in 2013, we decided we had to go digital. And the volunteers did an amazing job. They put out a wonderful magazine quarterly from 2013 through 2017. But that cost a lot of money too. We did it. It was professionally designed. That cost about $6,000 an issue. And,
wow. Yeah. It was beautiful. It was, there's nothing to beat holding it in your hands, but the quality online was outstanding.
Yeah. They did a fantastic job. It's unbelievable that these people put out the magazine for all these years, and it looked like they got paid for it. The quality of the articles, and I know, John, you're a regular contributor, so you know the magazine well.
Yeah.
The people, the editors, some of them are professional editors, others are just professional in their field, but the quality of the content in the magazine is outstanding. I recently worked on digitizing all of the past issues, and as I went through and linked all of the tables of contents to the articles, I couldn't stop reading. I kept going back and reading articles, some of them 20 years old. They're relevant, and the quality is amazing. So, there's a few things that look a little dated, but, they brought back good memories, and a ton of it is just still really, really relevant today.
How was it digitized? Were the original paper copies scanned, or how was all that done?
The later issues from the maybe 2009 on, we had PDFs. So we had the original PDFs, so the quality is great. The earlier issues, we've lost the digital copies, the originals that went to the printer. So those were scanned and optimized. They're a little bit clunkier to move around with, and the quality's not as beautiful, but the content's all there. And we're really glad to have this project done and have them all up on the website now.
Yeah. Well, one of my proudest early moments in Greyhounds was when my second Greyhound, Golden Girl, was selected to be on the cover, I think in 1996. And I'm telling you, I was busting my buttons in pride that it was a professionally taken photograph, so I couldn't brag on my own skills. But she was a beautiful dog, and that was when I got I think I got a call or maybe an email. I don't know if email was. I even had an email address in 1996. But anyway, that was a moment of great pride for me to have the cover girl.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a beautiful magazine.
And then what happened? What you said it was online through 2017. And then what decision was made then?
The dollars were going the wrong way. We just didn't have the paid subscribership to keep it up. It was still a paid magazine. And we just were spending more than we were making.
Yeah.
So I became president in 2016. And after looking, I'd been on the board, but of course the numbers become my problem when I'm the president. And I, along with the rest of the board, determined we really can't be bleeding any more money at this point. So,
Joan, were you still on the board at that point?
Nope. By that time, I was gleefully retired.
Ah, there you go. Did you still consider yourself a Greyhound Project volunteer?
I know enough of the way I behave, John, that if I didn't distance myself, I would become the source of a lot of unwanted gibberish.
Well, I can tell you that since the day I met Joan, I have been very comfortable talking to Joan, and I have never made a big decision about the Greyhound Project without discussing it with Joan and other past presidents. We get together and have dinner. I say, this is what I'm thinking. This is what we're talking about. What do you guys think? So, we're still all one happy family. She's not formally on the board, but she can't get rid of me.
She's in an emeritus position.
Exactly.
Then. Yeah, there you go. So how hard a decision was it to let the magazine go?
It was hard, but necessary. We visited it every year for years. Should we keep doing this? Should we not? And once the decision was made, it was kind of a relief for all of us. We knew it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And we had to do it before we were out of money. I'm proud to say we never ran out of money. We could have, but yeah, it was a hard decision, but the right thing, certainly.
And then, and did calendar sales remain strong throughout this time?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny what you would think with all the digital calendars that they'd fall off, but we've kept strong sales. I don't know the exact numbers this year because, as we'll talk about soon, the Greyhound Adoption League of Texas is going to be taking over, and it has more or less taken over.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've sold close to 10,000 calendars a year. The bulk of them directly to adoption groups to resell. And then late in the year, we sell them directly as well.
Yeah.
And they are a fundraiser for us as well.
Well, that's not too surprising given the quality of it, but so many adoption groups began producing their own calendars because it became easy to do with digital photography and so many of the, these online companies that can produce a calendar for next to nothing.
There's something different though about our calendar. The ones that have professional photographers don't have quite the heart and soul, if you ask me. But when people are sending in photos, we solicit photos from adopters, and every photo identifies the adopter, the dog, the town, the adoption group, and people take a lot of pride in it. There are some people who get in almost every year. They're amazing photographers. We've got a fan club out there, and there's something about seeing real dogs from regular people.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a funny and maybe interesting story about that. My group in 2008 inspired by the movie Calendar Girls. You remember that movie?
Mhm.
I do.
We produced, how shall I put it, a naked lady, tastefully naked lady, Greyhound calendar.
We saw it.
And in each month, there was a naked lady, one of our volunteers. I'll even say my own wife was Miss January on her horse, wearing nothing but her boots. And then they were in black and white, and the dogs were in color. And it was a lot of fun. We made about $8,000 on it. And but nevertheless, and this is the interesting part, we still put in our order for the Celebrating Greyhounds calendar, and we sold as many of those as we did the Gray Mates, as we called it, the Gray Mates calendar. So that's how strong and a lot of people just bought two, you know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so that's how strong the buyership of the calendar, the Celebrating Greyhounds calendar, is.
Yes. Yes. And that, we've seen a lot of calendars come and go, and Galt actually has their own calendar that they continue to publish. But I think once you do a calendar, you also realize how much work is involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got it down to a science, but it is an awful lot of work. The systems evolved over the years from the days when Joan and her gang started out with it, but everything's digital now. But it's definitely a lot of work, and there's still professional print production. It's takes a lot professional design.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did see your calendar, and it was beautiful.
It's a collector's item, and we sent a surprising number to England, Ireland, and that sort of thing. Maybe the Calendar Girls movie over there, inspired that.
Yeah.
So let's move up to the present time, and the Greyhound Project has recently, shall we say, moved. Tell us about what led up to that transition.
We had been talking about perhaps folding the Greyhound Project for a while, but we feel like there's too much going for us. The calendar's still going, Adopt a Greyhound Month is still going. The directory gets a ton of use. Our mission was to educate people about these dogs. When I adopted a Greyhound, people used to say, "What kind of a dog is that?" No one says, "What kind of a dog is that?" now. Everyone knows they are fantastic pets. Everyone says, "I've heard they make great pets." So number one, we've accomplished our mission. Number two, the Florida tracks were closing this year. There is a major shift in the market. And we felt there's too much going for us, but we've kind of accomplished our mission. And Greyhound Adoption League of Texas was brought up to me. We looked around at a lot of different groups trying to find someone who might be able to carry on our mission for us. And no one was as good a fit as Greyhound Adoption League of Texas. They already were producing a calendar. They're financially successful. They have an amazing volunteer base, like people who are excited and involved. And we were ready to pass the baton. And I feel really, really lucky that we found John and Susie McQuade.
So who called who?
I first got the idea from Michael McCann, our former president. He knows John and Susie pretty well. He suggested them. And at first I said, we really don't want an adoption group. We want somebody who's going to be neutral and not worrying about the dogs. And so we kind of hemmed and hawed on it for a little while, but I kept coming back to them. And finally, I just called them up and said, "Listen, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think?" And they thought it was a good idea.
Well, let's have them take it from there. John and Susie, when you got this call out of the blue, what did you think?
Oh my. Well, all the things that Sarah said about the industry, of course, had some impact. It did give us pause on making a decision, but we were interested we thought because of the racing industry contracting so rapidly, there would be numerous dogs released to adoption groups. And the fact that we were already producing a calendar, but it was modeled on Celebrating Greyhound's calendar. You know, of such a wonderful template in so many ways. And they helped us actually, in their own way, reading the articles, to form our own group in 2001. It was an opportunity, thinking that we would have so many dogs that we'd have to adopt, that this template and this mission needs to carry on, at least for the foreseeable future. Again, we were uniquely qualified to take it over just because of what we have done and the success and the continuity of our calendar. And you know, yes, we are the adoption group of Texas, you know, but you know, we have a national standing also, because we've worked with groups all across the country. We've made that a point to collaborate with other groups, and it's paid off in saving dogs and adopting more of these wonderful animals. We took it on, and I think we did fairly well on our first, with Sarah's help. Sarah stayed on and became an advisory board member to help us with this transition, so it would be up here seamless. We've taken over the website and all those kinds of functions with her help. And we have a person, I think, worked with them, is Joan Belle, who's one of our donors and adopters. Who's in Boston. No, they're in DC, I'm sorry. And with Sarah's help and Joanne's help, Joanne actually redid the list and vetted the adoption group list to keep it up to date, which was a heady project, I assure you. We put out our first, we got a late start because of COVID and the transition, but still we did well. Curating the pictures turned out to be quite a job, and Sarah helped and Joanne and others helped on that aspect. I think they really, okay, Susie told me that 6 people were actually involved on that. And we got it out, what did we print? Go to print.
October.
What?
October, we went to print. We ended up printing 6,500 this year, total, desk and wall.
We sold 6,300.
So
That's
far.
great.
We're still selling.
Yeah.
Also, when we put out our calendar, we did offer a twofer, and it, like you did, John, with your calendar, and it really increased our locally produced calendar sales. And everyone, most everyone ordered 2, Celebrating Greyhound desk or a diary and wall calendar. Often they did 3. So we found a great deal of generosity. You know, it's our intent to maintain the great quality, the heart and soul that Joan and started, and I agree with you. That calendar it touched us. In fact, we again modeled our local calendar after yours, because hey, plagiarism is the greatest form of flattery. Is it
That's
not?
right.
And we were so impressed. Your mission, your template deserves to continue. Your hard work, based on your soul and your accomplishment of excellence in both information and inclusion, create a community. You are our inspiration for golf, and that's why we have been successful, because again, we've plagiarized your great sentiments and your great actions and accomplishments. And that's why we're a national organization. We have chapters in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and throughout Texas. We do operate in Oklahoma and throughout the Midwest and all the way to the West Coast.
Yeah.
Every
Organizationally speaking, Susie and John, how is the Greyhound Project been subsumed within Galt, the Greyhound Adoption League of Texas, or are you maintaining two separate corporate organizations, two boards, et cetera?
Well, it will be subsumed, but we will keep the identity doing a DBA. The Greyhound Project name needs to always exist as long as there are greyhounds that need help and assistance and adoption. And Celebrating Greyhounds will be published, as a Greyhound Project calendar. And so we're going to keep those entities, at least in the mind and the eyes of the public, moving forward.
So let's talk about that a little bit. As you see the future, where do you see taking the Greyhound Project? Do you think it will continue to be primarily a calendar publisher and website holder, or do you think you'll do some other things with it?
That's still to be decided. I think in the next 2 years, the nostalgia of Greyhound as a racing industry contracts. Remember, Greyhound racing is still legal in most states. However, the competition for the gambling dollar has hastened its contraction. And Galt is, we keep a neutral stance, of course, publicly. However, we've worked with the industry since our inception, since we took over an adoption of the track in Harlingen, Texas, in our second year of operation in 2002, where the track had adopted maybe 2 or 3 dogs in 3 or 4 years, and we took out about almost 180 dogs our first year of operation, operating that adoption effort. We even had a kennel on site, though we decided to just bring the dogs in on a monthly basis as they graded out. That was an adventure and it was a great challenge, but it helped us organize and to be able to handle volume and with quality in both medical and shelter care. We adopted the dogs with no problems, and then sent several of the groups of dogs. We hauled them to other groups across the country who needed, especially to the West Coast. So what do I see for the future is, to get back to your original question, is nostalgia. There'll be dogs that will be grading, will be dribbling from the farms over time. We know that West Memphis will be done at the end of 2003. 23. It's going to be 22 or 23? I believe it's 22. Probably 23 because they have 3 years. But regardless, and many of the industry people that we know are going to become breeders of puppies for pets. I hope we don't have puppy farms, but I think that is something that's going to happen.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk about that nowadays, and I can say as a hobby breeder and knowing most of the hobby breeders in the U.S., it hasn't happened yet, and I'm hoping that with social media, with outfits like the Greyhound Project and Galt, we can kind of get the word out about who the responsible breeders are and who the irresponsible breeders are, to keep that down to a minimum.
That's where I see this going. We'll become more of a pet dog club type organization rather than an adoption of ex-racing greyhounds or retired greyhounds. In fact, we know several breeders that are already setting up to do this. A couple farms in Oklahoma and Texas.
Yeah. Well, and if that can happen, then that'll keep the racing bloodlines that we so value going. And like you say, maybe I've suggested this to several GPA chapters, for example, that don't stop operating as an adoption group. If you're going to need to handle returns in the future, plus you can become a breed club. We're all Greyhound enthusiasts, regardless of how we got started with the breed, and so there's going to be a natural need for a community of Greyhound enthusiasts, and they can be a breed club like all the other breeds have.
I assume coursing and those kinds of activities perhaps may increase in popularity again.
Yeah.
I think, agility, even. Several of our hounds become agility hounds, believe it or not, and quite good at it. And service hounds. I trained several to become beyond. I took them through. I'm I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and I trained service dogs as other breeds, and I put my two dogs through the same service dog training, where they could fetch and would stop on command and cover and do all the things that we would train the dogs to do for our disabled veterans. I think they'll be more interested in that too. I think the breed has its popularity thanks to the Greyhound Project, assembling, curating, amassing all this amazing information and publicity about the desirability of these hounds. Joan, I think you and I are on the same page. Plus, as you mentioned to me, you've cast your eyes to Europe as we have, and looking to bring hounds over. And I think that's a project that the Celebrating Greyhounds can get behind, as well as our adoption group. As we bring, because we brought over, I don't know, over 24 Irish hounds over the years, as many as 6 at a time. Of course, the COVID and travel bans have stopped that, but that should, we hope in several years will open up again. As, the Irish situation there of dogs being put down is kind of like Texas was during their heyday of breeding. There's not enough adopters and too many hounds, and they need us.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I do enjoy going to Ireland.
Let me know if you want some help with that, Joan.
Oh, you got it. We've auctioned off and used that as a prize. Hey, if you want to go to Ireland for a long weekend, we'll pay your way. You just got to bring back 2 dogs each. And I think it worked out really, really well. It creates adventure, and there's still going to be need to help these hounds in both the near and hopefully in the far future. We're planning for our succession. Susie and I are, we've been running this for 20 years. I hit 75, and we need to keep us intergenerational, and that's always been a challenge, and coeducational. Because you women do all the hard work, and we fellows like to hang out and have a beer or two and pretend that we're important, but you ladies do 80% of all the work. And to keep it coeducational has been a challenge. But getting younger people now to take up the mantle and want to keep the template moving forward for the good of these animals has also been a challenge. And we're looking at several ways of doing that. And we're going to be doing a series of music concerts as soon as COVID restrictions are cleared. Those were our first concert was canceled because of the shutdown. We have some, so we think that will help, and we can do an infomercial, and the bands can auction things off. We'll have dogs there, and we'll sell calendars when the calendars come out. It will be. We create this adventure for the younger folks to be involved and be excited. Yeah.
Well, it's a wonderful thing. It would be a shame for a fine organization like the Greyhound Project to have just kind of, as Sarah said, met its goal and decided, well, we're done. It's great that you all have taken it on and will keep it going.
We're very honored to be asked to have done this.
Absolutely.
To be able to be the successor of this and the maintainer of this. Of all the archives and information and the template. A great honor, which we take very, very seriously.
Well, we will follow it closely, and maybe we'll have you back in a year to see how the project's going and so forth. And Sarah and Joan, we certainly appreciate your being with us for this recording to kind of chronicle the history of the project. We see the podcast in many ways as chronicling the history of the breed, chronicling the history of Greyhound adoption, both here and in England and Ireland and Australia. So thank you all for joining us tonight, and we appreciate your time, and we will see you next episode.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. You can follow Greyhound Nation wherever you get your podcasts. If you've got a smart speaker at home, give it a try there. Just ask it to play the latest episode of Greyhound Nation. If you've been listening for a while, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, etc. You can also write to us via the contact form on our website, greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. We're also on Facebook. Search for our Grey Nation Show page. You can also tweet at us. It's at Grey Nation Show on Twitter. And if you're on Instagram, we're there too. Just follow at Grey Nation Show. This episode was produced in collaboration with host John Parker. Our theme music was composed and performed by Dimitri Taras. Thanks to our roundtable guests for this episode, Joan Belle, Sarah Norton, Susie McQuade, and John McQuade. You can learn more about the Greyhound Project by visiting their website, adopt-a-greyhound.org. More information about the McQuade's adoption group can be found at greyhoundadoptiontx.org. The Celebrating Greyhounds calendar continues to be published each year. Check with your local Greyhound adoption group for more information on making a purchase in 2021. You can find links to all of these resources in this episode's show notes. I'm Michael Burns, and you've been listening to Greyhound Nation.